the Chancellor of Vishwabharati. He was born in an old aristocratic family, we learn over there. Now, what kind of old aristocratic family? Aristocratic, the moment you say aristocratic, we feel that they are the family had come from the family of an earlier Raja or king or Nawab or something like that. But let's see in what sense they were aristocrats. Now, in Indian history and in the history of Bengal, 1757 is one particular year which is supposed to be very, very important, and people are sad about it at the same time as well. Do you know the significance of the year 1757? Why this is mentioned?
Ma'am,
It is not.
1757 is the year of the Battle of Plassey.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely right. So, Battle of Plassey, as the British pronounce it, Plassey, you have it over here in that way. So, in 1757, you have this battle, and it meant that the Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Daulah, lost to the British. And who were the British? The British were the people of the East India Company. The East India Company apparently had come to India in order to do trade and commerce. Conducting trade and commerce was their primary business, primary goal. But they got involved in the politics of the country, in the politics of Bengal, and the result was that they won in this Battle of Plassey. And whether they wanted it or not, they became the rulers. So at that point of time, they ruled, they had all the power, but didn't bother to take care of the people's welfare much. That was left to other people. And as a result of the Battle of Plassey, the administration of Bengal practically went into the hands of the British. Now, the English over here strictly would mean the East India Company, and the company at that time was making Calcutta important. Calcutta actually was supposed to be made of Gobindapur, Sutanuti, and Kolikata, three villages, and there were people who used to stay in these three villages, some Bengali people, etc. And this was on the east side of the Ganga or the Ganges, as the British would pronounce it. Rabindranath's forefathers left Khulna. Khulna is now in Bangladesh. It is a big district in Bangladesh now. So it is supposed that.
Ma'am, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you are not properly audible.
Let's see if I can do anything about it. Just a minute. Is it better or worse? Is it better or worse?
No, ma'am, we can't hear you clearly.
You can't hear me clearly. That's a problem. Then, no, I'm not even using headphones. I'm teaching from a phone and I'm teaching directly with the speaker right in front of my mouth. Okay.
It's okay, ma'am.
It's okay now. Okay, that's better then. Okay, I'll hold it over here. Now it happens that I'm talking about Kolkata, as you know it now, was called Calcutta by the British, and Calcutta was a place which was made of Kolikata, Gobindapur, and Sutanuti, apparently three villages lying to the east of Ganga or the Ganges, the big river. British called it the Ganges, of course. And it is supposed that Rabindranath's forefathers had left Khulna, which is a big district in Bangladesh now, and they had come to Gobindapur and they had settled down. Is there still a problem?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Should I leave and try to re-enter? Let's see. Is it audible now? Yes. Is it audible now?
No, ma'am, not clearly.
No,
No,
ma'am.
miss.
Okay. Then what I'll have to do is to try to leave and come back again. So you will have to wait for for 2-3 minutes, perhaps at best?
Ma'am, at this point, it's okay. Like, I think it's a speaker or something.
Okay. So if it is okay, then I'll continue. If the other people on the other connection can hear it as well. Can you? I was not talking actually. So it's flickering, disrupting, fluctuating, something like that. Again, there is a problem.
Yes,
Is it
ma'am, the
audible
voice
now?
is fluctuating, ma'am. Ma'am, the voice is fluctuating. I
The
can't be
voice is
understand, ma'am.
okay. Now is it better?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am, now it is better.
Okay. So okay, now you will be able to hear me clearly. The problem is that every time somebody comes in, I get distracted, and that creates a problem, right? I have to admit them even as they come in. So that is creating a problem, I believe. Now, yes, to return to our discussion, we were talking about the forefathers of Rabindranath, and there were people in the East India Company with their trade and commerce interests, and many people had opportunities to come and settle down in Calcutta from different parts of Bengal, from different parts of the neighboring states, etc. And perhaps the forefathers of Rabindranath were such people. And there were two important traders, leading traders during that time, the Sheths and the Boshaks. They were carrying on trade with the English company, that is the East India Company. And Rabindranath's ancestor, Panchanan Kushari, he was working in alliance with them. And the Kusharis, if it is their original surname, then why don't people call them Kusharis? Rabindranath Kushari, whoever has heard about that, nobody. So they call him Rabindranath Tagore. Now, why is that? This Panchanan Kushari, he came and settled down in what came to be known as Calcutta during that period. He was a person who belonged to a Brahmin family, and his family was looked up to by the lower caste. At that point of time, sadly speaking, people were interested in the castes. So, lower caste people of the place had called them Thakur Moshai or Thakur because they were Brahmins in a way. So, this Thakur is something which stuck to them. So Panchanan Kushari was better known as Panchanan Thakur, and the English tongue could not pronounce Thakur properly. They pronounced it as Tagore, and then this Tagore stuck to the family names. So they were now known as the Tagore family. Panchanan Thakur became Panchanan Tagore, and Tagore became the surname of this family. So Panchanan Tagore had 3 grandsons, and now the story of the family begins in earnest, so to say. These 3 grandsons, Nilmoni, Darpanarayan, and Govindaram, they bought land in the Pathuriaghata area. Pathuriaghata in the northern part of Calcutta. They settled down over there in 1765. So a few years after the Battle of Plassey. Nilmoni and Darpanarayan worked as revenue officers of the British, and therefore it meant they earned a lot of money. And from these two, that is Nilmoni and Darpanarayan, actually they stood at the beginning, at the origin of the 2 parts of the renowned Tagore family. One part, the Jorashako branch, and the other part, the Pathuriaghata branch. After the Battle of Plassey, Nilmoni Tagore and Darpanarayan together had lived in a joint family at Pathuriaghata for a very long time. But in 1784, the year 1784 is known in the history of India as the year when the Asiatic Society was created. Jones and the Asiatic Society, which did a lot of work towards unearthing beauties, the wonders of literature, art, sculpture, history of ancient India, ancient Bengal, ancient Asia. So 1784 is the year when the Asiatic Society was formed, and at the same time in 1784, this Nilmoni and Darpanarayan split into two separate families, their joint family. Nilmoni Tagore had become the forefather of the Jorashako family to which Rabindranath belonged. Is there any problem so far? In case somebody has not understood something, you will ask me. From time to time, I'll stop and ask you this question. And if you have any questions, any doubts, we will clear the doubts and then make progress. Try to make some progress. So, any doubts? Hope.
Ma'am,
Yes,
is this time begins from 1881 to 1947?
No. We are not talking about 1861 to 1941, the dates of Tagore. 1947 is the date of Indian independence, which comes later after his death. 1881 is when you are talking about the chronology of Tagore's life. You believe that I am going to do the thing from 1881 because Dipankar has taught you 1861 to 1881, that phase of Rabindranath's life. It's not like that at all. I have gone back to the forefathers of Tagore. I'm talking about his family background. Unless and until you understand his family background, you will not be able to move on from 1881. Okay?
Yeah, ma'am, get it.
Okay. Right. Any other doubts? Anything that you need to know about right now?
Ma'am, you said in 1784 something happened.
Yes, you couldn't
Will you
hear me
please?
properly, perhaps. Yes, I'll of course
Yes,
do
yes.
that. Yes, in 1784, I was talking about the Asiatic Society. The Asiatic Society, where you get the name of Sir William Jones. This Asiatic Society was formed in 1784. You still have the Asiatic Society on Park Street in Calcutta, in Kolkata right now. The Asiatic Society does a wonderful amount of work on ancient Indian and Asian history, literature, sculpture, arts, etc. So it is a huge repository of knowledge. They had tried to create, they had come from this alien country, England, but they were very interested in ancient and earlier Indian history and culture. So they worked relentlessly, they worked very hard in order to find these relics. And they have preserved these relics, these books, these manuscripts, etc. Okay. So I was talking about the Asiatic Society. And I was also trying to say that in the same year, 1784, in the life of the Tagore family, there was a major twist in the sense that the joint family, actually jointly maintained by Nilmoni and Darpanarayan, the two Tagore men, Nilmoni Tagore and Darpanarayan Tagore separated, and Nilmoni Tagore went off to Jorashako. This Jorashako family is the family to which Rabindranath belonged. The other part of the family under Darpanarayan continued to stay in Pathuriaghata, the ancestral home. Okay, but from 1784, the Rabindranath's family, actually, the family in which Rabindranath was born, that family came away to Jorashako. And you know about the Jorashako Thakurbadi, some of you at least must have heard of the Jorashako Thakurbadi, where Rabindranath was born. right? The family house, family home where he was born. In 1861, okay? Now, Nilmani Tagore had three sons, Ramlochon, Rammoni and Rambandh. Now, the idea is that there was a famous person in the family later. He was called Dwarokanath, and he was even called a prince. He was not born as a prince in any royal family. He was born in the Tagore family, but he earned he earned the epithet of a prince. And why was it like that? It was because, you see, this background needs to be known. Nilmani Tagore's son, Rammoni, had a son called Dwarokanath. But you see, Ramlochon became the chief of the family in 1791 when Nilmani died. And Ramlochon, Rammoni together, the two brothers, kept on purchasing estates, so they were becoming richer by the day, so to say. Rammoni's son, Dwarokanath, 1794 to 1846, those are the dates. He was the adopted son of Ramlochon. And Ramlochon was the, in Indian or in Bangla language, it is called the Korta of the family, the patriarch kind of a figure in a family. So Ramlochon was the Korta of the family, the chief of the family. And Ramlochon adopted his brother's son, Dwarokanath, and this Dwarokanath added immensely to the landed and other properties of the family. Now, you know, how did Dwarokanath manage to get a lot of things for the family? Number one, we learn that at this point of time, of course, at all points of time, education is very important. And what does education mean? At that point of time, most of the Indians, if they were educated at all, you must remember that most of them were illiterate. Our forefathers were illiterate, most of them. Those who were educated in Persian. Persian was the language that was used during the Mughal period, in a way. So, for actually formal things, Persian was the language which was used as the court language, the language learned by the aristocracy. So Dwarokanath came in contact with the English people, with the British people. So on the one hand, he knew Persian very well. On the other, he knew that English is the language which he would have to learn, and he learned English very well. Now, this has another kind of significance. The significance is you have the laws, the land laws, the commercial laws written in Persian earlier, and now the British are becoming important, more and more important. So they are writing the laws, their laws, in English. So our Dwarokanath, young man, was in a wonderful position. He knew very well about the old laws written in Persian and the new laws written in English. As a result, the British began to take notice of him, that this person knows such a lot of things, and so did the Nawabs, the Rajas, the kings, the aristocrats of Bengal, Bihar, etc. So he earned in various ways. He was in contact with the employees of the East India Company because he knew English. He had this commercial kind of wisdom. And when he was quite young, even at that point of time, he had his own commercial venture. And initially, he helped the Macintosh and Company in the purchase of silk and indigo. And then he started to work independently, purchasing silk and indigo, being a trader in silk and indigo. At the same time, he had considerable experience by this time in the laws of the land, especially commercial laws and land laws. Therefore, there was a period of transition when the administrative and legal system of the Nawabs was being replaced by the English laws, and Dwarokanath was well versed in this English laws. Therefore, he was chosen as advisor by a number of aristocrats in Bengal and Bihar, because they knew only about the old Persian laws and they couldn't make sense of the English laws. Dwarokanath knew both so very well that he learned hefty fees as their consultant, so to say. You would understand the word consultant, perhaps. That is why he used the word consultant. And then, when he was 29 years old, he was appointed as the collector of 24 Parganas and the salt agent too. And within a few years, he became the revenue officer of the tax and excise departments too, which means on behalf of the East India Company, he is collecting all kinds of taxes now. And of course, he is the tax collector. It is an immensely powerful position. And the East India Company, the British government, so to say, would pay him very well, pay him very handsomely. Right. So apart from these services, he had his independent business. He had shares in the Macintosh and Company, which I served earlier. He was also the first Bengali to found a bank, because by this time there was a company called the Car Tagore Company, C-A-R-R, C-A-R-R, Car Tagore. Tagore is of course Dwarokanath Tagore. The Car Tagore Company had many, many possessions and it was growing very rich. So Dwarokanath was the first Bengali to found a bank in 1829 in association with some Europeans, and this bank was called the Union Bank. Now, the East Indian Company by 1833 turned towards administrative affairs clearly and openly, because that is what they were supposed to do from now on. They were not supposed to have a commercial interest any longer. They were supposed to be rulers in India. And at this point, Dwarokanath, he had this Car Tagore Company. So what other things did he do apart from setting up a bank? He secured a lease of the Raniganj coal mines, carried on a trade in indigo and also in sugar. He went on adding to his landed property and bought an extensive North Bengal estate. He got that too. So he is very rich at this point of time. And people began to call him because he had thrown wonderful lavish parties, very, very cultured, lavish parties, etc. And people could see how rich he was. They began to call him Prince Dwarokanath Tagore. So I will stop again over here for a moment and ask you if there are any doubts. Yes, if you have any question, I think Aditi, you raised your hand. In case you have a question, do tell me.
Ma'am, the title of prince was given by common people or the British themselves gave the title?
It was never a formal title given to him. People just called him prince. Okay. It was not as if the British government had given him the title of a prince or he was a born prince or anything like that. He came to be known, the best we know is that he came to be known as Prince Dwarokanath. Right?
Okay, ma'am.
And in other cases, for example, Raja Bahadur, Rai Bahadur, etc., these were the kinds of titles that were given to prominent Indian gentlemen, aristocrats, rich people, zamindars, landowners, etc., by the British government. Now, the British government never called him Raja Bahadur or Rai Bahadur or anything like that. So, it is just said that he came to be known as Prince Dwarokanath because of his riches. Right?
Yes,
Any
ma'am.
other question? Okay, any other question? Yes.
If you like, if you would explain that that trader of silk and indigo, that part.
Okay. You know, for the Macintosh and Company, which is served earlier, he knew how to be a trader in silk and indigo. And then later, when he was no longer working for Macintosh and Company, but rather for the British government as a whole, as the tax collector, etc., of the 24 Parganas, the excise collector of 24 Parganas, etc., etc. At that point of time, after 1833, you remember, the British government was becoming the British government only and no longer the East Indian Company, which means that they were not supposed to have interests in commercial affairs any longer. That is what the British Parliament told them, that go and take care of the administrative problems in India as you are doing and forget about your commercial interests. You have enough money already. So the East India Company was gradually turning into the de facto government in India. And at this point of time, there was the opportunity for other people to come up with their own commercial companies, trading companies, etc. So the Car Tagore, CARR, Car Tagore Company was formed, and Dwarokanath Tagore was the Tagore in Car Tagore Company. The Car Tagore Company had coal mines, had taken a long lease on the Raniganj coal mines and had started trading in a major way in silk, indigo, etc. And you know, they had their own vessels for that as well, which means they had to buy steamers, ships, etc. kinds of things in order to carry their cargo, their own cargo. Because how else are you going to make profit if you are supposed to pay rent to so many people? So this company was really expanding. That is what I meant. And Dwarokanath, as a consequence, was becoming very, very rich. Okay.
Yes,
Ma'am,
ma'am.
what do you mean by indigo over here?
Indigo is, you know, nowadays perhaps what you use in order to whiten your clothes. Don't say vanish. There is this indigo colored liquid which you must have seen in your childhood at least.
Yes,
Hmm?
ma'am, we have seen.
Yes, so that is the colored indigo, and indigo as a dye was produced in India. I should tell you a few words about this. It is something which requires extensive farming, which means the British indigo planters, they would go to a village and say, you plant indigo for me, and you don't have to plant anything else. For example, don't plant paddy, don't plant any other food grains. You plant indigo for me, and villagers, I'm going to give you some money in advance. You take that money and begin to plant indigo, which I will take away from you later on. So that is exactly what began to happen. These indigo planters were supposed to be very, very cruel towards the poor Bengali villagers, not only in Bengal but also in Bihar. This was the situation. And as a result, indigo plantation meant a lot of, I mean, after the indigo was harvested, the plants were cut off. They were treated in a certain way in factories, indigo plants, factories in that sense. And there the dye called indigo was produced. It was a natural dye, DYE, color. And this was used all over the world, UK, USA, Germany, etc. All the countries used this dye. So Indian indigo was very famous all over the world. It was very lucrative, which means people wanted to buy and sell indigo all the time because they made a lot of money out of it. Now the Car Tagore Company was dealing in indigo, and Dwarokanath Tagore was an indigo planter too. He had indigo plantations too. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
It was only later when artificial indigo colored dye was created as a result of the efforts of scientists, etc. Only then did indigo plantation stop at this scale. and the cruelty stopped then only. In Bengal actually, we have a famous play in Bangla, and later it was translated into English. This play was Nil Darpon. Nil Darpon protested as a play, it protested against the kind of oppression carried on by the British masters over the poor villagers. The poor villagers were ravaged, killed, their women were desecrated, as I say. So many things, they would even die in the process. So this was the kind of oppression that was going on in Bengal and Bihar during the period. And so indigo plantation meant that you made a lot of money, but it had this background story as well. Okay, any questions? You can keep on asking questions.
Ma'am, can you repeat once again Dwarkanath's possessions?
Okay, I will. You have it in your book, but I don't know whether you have a copy of the book at all or not, so I'll repeat.
No, miss, you have not gotten hand those books.
Okay, I'll repeat, definitely. First thing that you remember is his independent business meant that he had, as the Kartegor company, he was in possession of a bank. He was the founder of a bank, the Union Bank. Banking business is business like any other business, right? This is not a government bank. This was a commercial bank. And as a banker, he earned money too. So that's one. Then you have Tagore, that is Dwarkanath Tagore, as part of the Kartegor company, had a lease of the Raniganj, Ranigunj, Raniganj coal mines. He was carrying on a trade in indigo and also in sugar. At the same time, he was buying more and more land and landed estates, especially in North Bengal. He bought a huge parcel of land or an estate. What else did he have? I'll give you some more. Yes, agriculture estate not only in Bengal but also in Orissa. Steamboats that plied to foreign shores. Indigo, salt, sugar, tea, coal mines. He was trading in indigo, salt, sugar, tea, and coal. And if you remember, the Union Bank. And all this through the Kartegor company, from which he would get a hefty profit. Clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So you've got a whole list of the possessions of Dwarkanath Tagore. And then what happens? It happened that Dwarkanath Tagore is famous not just for his material possessions. What did he do with the money? If he had spent the money just having lavish parties, etc., then people would have remembered it for a few years. But we remember him not only as Rabindranath's grandfather, but in his own right. So what was the situation at that point of time? You need to know about the times a little in order to appreciate what Dwarkanath was doing. And for that, you need to imagine, you need to remember, imagine, learn about a situation in Bengal where most of the people were illiterate and they did not earn much. They were very simple people with their own kinds of jobs based on caste, etc. That was a major problem. And about Hindu women, many women were burnt at the funeral pyre of their own husbands as a part of the sati. The sati was one bad thing, and the other bad thing was the kulin. The kulin means that high caste people in Bengal would marry perhaps one Kulin gentleman, even if he's 90 years old, dying, he could marry hundreds and hundreds of very young, say 2, 3 years old, 5, 6 years old, 10 years old, very, very young girls. He could keep on marrying them. It was as if he was making them feel very, very honored. Their families were feeling honored because this Kulin gentleman had married a girl in the family. And the Kulin gentleman in return would get a lot of money or property for marrying this girl. So they had these kinds of very strange ideas, but these ideas prevailed. As I said, sadly speaking, caste mattered so much to them. So these people, these Bengalis earlier, they tried to do a number of things. Some of them at least tried to bring in reforms. Reforms in which fields? Religion, society, culture. And how? Now in this case, you will have to think of a very important name. The name is Raja Ram Mohan Roy. Have you ever heard of him? Raja Ram Mohan Roy?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. In what context can you tell me? Why have you heard of him?
He stopped the Sati Pratha with the help of
Yes, he
British.
stopped the sati rituals. Yes, he did. Yes, absolutely. But apart from that, he also did a number of things. For example, he was a very, very well-educated person. He knew many, many languages. And this was very unlike the other people of his own times. He had read the Vedas, the Upanishads directly because he knew Sanskrit very well. He had read the Quran, that is the holy work of the Muslims. He read the Quran, he read the Bible, he read all possible, whatever was available to him by way of books of religion. And he learned all these things on his own, read them very, very carefully, and found out that at that point of time, Bengali Hindus were worshipping, as in Bengali it is said, Tetrish Koti Dev Devi, which means 33 million. 33 million, I believe, right? Am I correct? Because the Indian system and the English system of counting is not quite the same, you know. I think 33 million gods
It's
and
330
goddesses.
million, ma'am.
330 million, right, absolutely. 330 million. Now, people are still entering. That distracts me a little. However, to return. Now, yes, 330 million gods and goddesses were supposed to exist. And what happened is Raja Ram Mohan Roy read all these religious books in various languages, in from various kinds of cultures, various parts of the world, and he understood that ultimately God is one entity. And if you believe in that one entity, if you have faith in that one entity, all these other manifestations are subsumed into that one entity. God is one. And this is called Brahma. This one God he called Brahma. Brahma, because that is the word he found in the ancient Vedas, Upanishads, etc. So this one Brahma, and then people like him came to be known as the Brahmavadi, which means the Brahma Samaj, the Brahma movement had started. That instead of worshipping many, many gods and goddesses, if you have faith in just one God, that will suffice. But not many Hindu people accepted this. There were people in opposition and there were debates, public debates. Ram Mohan won in those debates because he knew how to argue against many, many people, including Christian missionaries, including Maulavis, including Hindu Pandits. He knew how to talk very well because he had learned so much. And they had to accept defeat in his hands often, quite often. The result was Raja Ram Mohan Rai in the field of religion was trying to bring in this kind of a reform, trying to simplify religion into a direct relationship between the individual and his or her God. And on the other hand, you have what else? There was social reforms as well, initiated by Raja Ram Mohan Roy, because a person who is so well educated in religion, in the ways of the society, etc., to that person it is quite natural that he will understand the sorrows of the women too, the terrible suffering that people of various castes had to undergo, and even high caste people had to undergo because of this schooling system, because of this sati, how women suffered, etc. So there also he tried to bring in reforms. And as a result of his efforts, it is said, he kept on fighting against it. And I'll give you his dates. This is necessary. Raja Ram Mohan Roy's dates are 1772 to 1833. Right. He came and settled down in Calcutta in 1814. And the idea is that Dwarkanath soon became very attached to Raja Ram Mohan Roy. Dwarkanath was born in 1794 and he lived till 1846. So Dwarkanath was younger, right? He was 22 years younger. If you think of Ram Mohan Roy, but even then he became a follower of Raja Ram Mohan Roy, very sincere follower, so to say. And the result was that during this period, we had also other people making attempts at social reforms, at making people aware about what needs to undergo a change in the society and in religion and other things like that. So I should just mention that as a result of the efforts of Raja Ram Mohan Roy, followed by Dwarkanath, Prince Dwarkanath, etc., in 1829, the Governor General, Lord Bentinck, William Bentinck, Bentinck, actually passed the law which prohibited the sati rituals. So women need not any longer, Hindu women need not any longer die along with their husbands, get burned to death along with their husbands on their husband's funeral pyre. So you can understand, if one Kulin gentleman dies and he has hundreds of wives, some wives at least would be put to death. So it was a terrible thing for many, many women and very young girls at that. Right. So this terrible thing stopped at last, at least by way of law, legally. Practically, some people kept on trying to do it. Now, what else happened during that period? This was a part of the contribution of Raja Ram Mohan Roy and his follower, Prince Dwarkanath. But there were other people. For example, you can think of the year 1818 when there was the first publication of two Bengali periodicals. You know, Bengalis love to read, it is said. And at that point of time as well, these periodicals meant that there was a circulation in the society of opinions. And those Bengalis, those few Bengalis who knew how to read and write, would be interested in the opinions that were aired in these periodicals. The first periodical was called Samachar Darpan, Samachar, Samachar, and the other part is Darpan, S capital D capital Darpan. Darpan, of course, means a mirror. So Samachar, that part would mean news. So it is holding up a mirror to the current news kind of a thing, Samachar Darpan. It was published by the Sirampur Mission, and there was a Bengal Gazette. Now, we all know it is usually pronounced as Gazette, but in this case, it was called the Gazette. Bengal Bengal, whatever you want. Gazette is G capital A Z E T I. And this was published by Ganga Kishore Bhattacharya. So you see, now you have two periodicals and you get to know about what is happening in the country, what is happening in Bengal, in the lives of other people, etc. So these are the two other important incidents. Now, what role did Dwarkanath play in this situation? Dwarkanath actually, as a follower of Ram Mohan Roy, kept alive certain ideas, etc. when Raja Ram Mohan Roy was no longer there. Raja Ram Mohan Roy had passed away in 1833, and after his death in Bristol, in the UK, in Gloucestershire, Bristol is located in Gloucestershire in UK. His ideals had to be followed by somebody. His ideals had to be kept alive by somebody, and that somebody turned out to be Prince Dwarkanath. So Prince Dwarkanath had two sides apparently. One, the money-making side, and the other, the side which took care of the culture, the society in his own way. So what did he do? As a person who was very, very concerned about his surroundings, about his society, one of the major things that he did was, you have heard of the Hindu College, which was later known as the Presidency College, now known as the Presidency University. This was created, Hindu College was created in 1817, and you know their foundation day is 20th January. So we are, today is 18th January, 2 days later, that is their foundation day. 1817, 17. Now, you know, when the Hindu College was created by the foremost Bengali gentleman, and Dwarkanath was a part of this enterprise. Ram Mohan Roy became a part of this enterprise, but he was not permitted to stay there for a longer period of time because there were divisions in opinion about religion, about other things with him. But Dwarkanath was still there, right? So he was one of those people who caused the foundation of the Hindu College. Then another very important thing took place. In 1835, the first medical college was established in Calcutta. And Dwarkanath had a very interesting role to play in the life of the college, this medical college. The first thing he did was he gave the medical students stipends. And why did the medical students need stipends? They were becoming doctors after all, certified doctors. So the idea was that the very, very orthodox Hindu society would not permit the students to study at all, because if you are cutting up other people's dead bodies in order to learn what is going on, what happens inside a person's body, etc., that is not the right kind of thing to do, according to many Hindu. At that point of time, many Hindus believed that these medical students are doing all the wrong things in the name of learning. But this was a kind of prejudice according to Dwarkanath, Prince Dwarkanath Tagore. So what did he do? He offered the students stipends to make them very enthusiastic about their studies, to inspire them to study better. And he also was present whenever a dissection took place, because it would have to take place in a very hush-hush kind of a situation, lest many people come up and protest against it and the dissection is not held at all. Dissection, as you know, is the cutting up of dead human bodies in order to know about the anatomy, the physiology, the inner workings of the dead, of the person, of any person, any human body. So dissection being a taboo, according to the Hindu people, most of the Hindu people, whenever a dissection took place, it would require a lot of arrangements. And Dwarkanath would stand there with the medical students all along, encouraging them, so that they were not afraid of doing this dissection. The third thing that he did was, on his second visit to England in 1845, he took with him 4 medical students. He took them to London. He paid for 2 of these students the entire travel, education, stay, whatever they needed. He paid for everything. And you know, these 4 medical students he had taken along were the first Indians to receive the diploma of the Royal College of Surgeons. And 2 of them won medals and became MDs as well. So you see, he had directly inspired the students, helped the students to learn about modern medicine. Then what else did he do? He was one of the first Indian patrons. In fact, he was the first Indian patron in all possibility of the Asiatic Society in Bengal. The Asiatic Society was founded in 1784, but Indians could be patrons later on, and he was one of those first Indian patrons of the Asiatic Society. And what else? You know, when we talk about the Asiatic Society, from the Asiatic Society, so many other important historical bodies were born. For example, the Archaeological Survey of India, the Zoological Survey of India, the Botanical and Geological Surveys of India, the Indian Museum in Calcutta, all owe their origin to the Asiatic Society. So, through his patronage of the Asiatic Society, it is as if Dwarkanath was one of the forefathers of so many very important institutions in modern India. What else did he do? Dwarkanath had helped in the establishment, or he helped the working of the Agricultural and Horticultural Society, which was established in 1820. The Calcutta District Charitable Society in 1830, which was established in 1830. The Hindu Benevolent Institution established in 1831, and the Fever Hospital. And he was also the magnet, M-A-G-N-A-T, not the magnet as in attracting iron things, right? This is a separate spelling, M-A-G-N-A-T. He was the first commercial magnate of modern India to build a network of business enterprises on European lines, and the first native industrialist in that sense. In 1838, the Landowners Society was founded by Dwarkanath, and you know, out of this Landholders Society, what came up? The British Indian Association, and the British Indian Association later gave birth to all kinds of associations, societies, parties, which asked for independence from the government. So he actually stood at the head of all these things. And in 1842, he had gone to England, and crossing the Black Waters was a taboo in Hinduism. Raja Ram Mohan Roy had gone to England too, but he did not return. You remember, he died in Bristol. But Dwarkanath Tagore returned to India and faced the music clearly, openly. The Hindu Pandits kept on saying that this is something prohibited that you have done, and you are now not a proper Hindu any longer. But he withstood that pressure. And what happened in England? Queen Victoria, the nobility over there, that is the aristocrats, and the leaders of the progressive and radical movements in England, they actually respected Prince Dwarkanath Tagore so very much. We know that Max Muller, you have heard of Max Muller as one of the greatest thinkers at that point of time, perhaps. Max Muller was a student of the Rig Veda in Paris then. And Max Muller had seen and admired Dwarkanath. So he had been to Europe and England, and wherever he had gone, Prince Dwarkanath Tagore, he had been so very well received, respected. Dwarkanath died on 1st August 1846 when he was 52 years old in London. And now we realize why, apart from what he made by way of money, that money was not there when he had died. There were so many debts that his son Devendranath found out that it was a debt that the entire estate of his father was full of debts, only debts, no tangible money anywhere. But in the meantime, you can see the intangible part, the part that you cannot buy, sell, touch. It is not about money. It is about his influence on the contemporary social scene, the social reforms that he had undertaken, the cultural bodies that he had created. That is what we think of the legacy of Prince Dwarkanath. So I will stop for the day. If you have any questions or if you have to disperse for your second period, then you are welcome to do either.